Hi, this is Stephen Brower from Raton Valley Community College. This is sort of an overview of Chapter 12 out of the Systems Analysis and Design book by Tilley and Rosenblatt. It would help if you have the publisher slides next to you as I go through, as I go through this. Okay, so by the way, the overall thing for the chapter, it's managing system support, and part of that is dealing with users and getting them trained. Now, in the implementation in Chapter 11, it was mentioned about the training that was done, and I talked about the instructor-led training, which was done in large groups, bringing people up to speed, or having them work with the new system. What happens is after a system goes live and then someone else comes into the organization, we need to get them up to speed. So it's more the ongoing training, or for other individuals that come in, how do we get them up and running on the new system? And well, we need a series of resources made available to them. So user manuals, there also could be videos that are going through certain tasks, other resources they can refer to, FAQs, and as a system has been up for a while, that the support staff, so when I refer to here, I'm jumping ahead, the knowledge banks that the support staff have, a lot of times the knowledge banks is more for the support staff themselves, so that when they run into an issue, they don't have to research the same thing again. But sometimes the most common requests that come into the help desk will turn into frequently asked questions, where they may document it in the hope that maybe a user can find the answer on their own before then go calling the help desk. And the step-by-step is, if there is a process through the system that requires multiple stages or multiple screens, it would help that the users can see, well, how do they go from one to another step to get through the process. Now, the support staff, one is they answer via the phone, and sometimes we'll have help desks that would be answering questions about a system. We'll maintain it along the way. And what some organizations then will look at is, well, for the support of the system, in terms of those initial phone calls that come in, are they going to be employees of the company? Or are we going to outsource that support or offshore the support? So outsourcing would be using an outside agency, but within the United States, to do the support. Offshore would be, we use an outside agency, but they're overseas. And so that's something that it works into the cost of the system to figure out how that's going to be maintained. Ongoing maintenance of the system. Well, bugs may come up. So as diligent as we are in doing our testing, we may run into a situation where the system just behaves differently than we expect. It was something that didn't come out of testing, or maybe it was based on a particular piece of data that wasn't tried in testing, and they realized that there's a bug in the system, and so then the system has to get patched. And so depending on the emergency of those, that could be immediate repairs that have to be done immediately, or it could be something that, if there are regular releases of a system, which I do refer here also in terms of enhancements, but it may be, well, if we can live until the next release, like next month, we can work on that later. But patches to a system many times are just addressing some of those bugs that will come up. Another part of the maintenance of the system would be, there could be a system failure. So we could have a hard drive crash, and there is technology to try to avoid that. So RAID, redundant array of independent disks, is a way that we actually can handle up to 2 disk failure and not lose any time. So there are those things that can be done, but if you have 3 disks fail, well, then you have a crash. And then the other thing in terms of failures is something that you hope you don't get into, and that has to do with when a capacity has been exceeded and the system can't run anymore. Now, what whoever's supporting the system should do is they should be running reports on a regular basis and seeing, are we approaching the capacity? Because if we're getting near the capacity of the drives, then they have to make sure they add more drives and somehow let the system expand onto drives. But if there's a sudden entry of data that was much more high volume than was expected, it could be they thought they had another month or two to go, and it just filled up on a particular day. And so in terms of who would get involved, and sometimes the system failures, that might be more the system administrators that would get involved. And then in terms of the bug fixes, that might be the maintenance programmers or the systems analysts that would get involved. Enhancements. Now, sometimes the enhancements are, as users become more sophisticated using a system, they may come up with ideas of, hey, this would be great if. It would be nice if the system could do this. Maybe they figured a way of combining two steps together or something. The users may come up with some ideas on how things would be better. But sometimes some changes to the system are by outside entities. So, for example, the government. Any financial system that has to report to the SEC, well, every time the SEC changes the rules about what the reporting is, well, that report has to change, therefore the system has to change. And so it's reporting to the government, which could change on a yearly basis, could affect the system. If there's tax being collected, and it could be as the tax laws change. So if you think of a company that's selling things, when a state changes their sales tax, that has to be enhanced. But if it's a more complex thing than just a percentage, then maybe more has to be done. Depending on the nature of the enhancement, it could be significant enough that it may require the entire development lifecycle, and basically going through back to the drawing board literally. So how does this affect the data flow diagram? Do we need another entity that needs to be added? It affects our ER diagrams. Does our database, do we need another table in our database to handle this? So some major enhancements will require that entire SDLC, which then would include testing in a test environment, the users doing the user acceptance testing on that. Other kind of maintenance would be, and I already had mentioned the thing about capacity. They should be keeping track on the system to make sure that we're not running out of space. The system administrator should be making sure we don't run out of space. But sometimes we may get to a point where the physical hardware has to change, and they're going to have to migrate the system from one server to another server, and that could be time consuming. It could take some time. They have to bring the system down for a period of time in order to handle that kind of an upgrade. And other things could be, suppose a system which is network intensive has been using the network more than was expected, and the network needs to be upgraded. So there could be some enhancements that have to be made for that as well. I already had thrown some of these terms out, so I'm probably repeating myself, but the system administrators would usually be dealing with the day-to-day operation of the system. And so they would be the ones like adding a user to the system, and they would be the ones checking the reports to see, are we nearing capacity? The systems analysts / programmers / DBAs. Now, part of the reason why I did / is sometimes for some smaller companies or smaller systems, it's one person, that's all of that. Actually, for some really small systems, one person is all of this. But depending on the size of the corporation, depending on the size of the system, that there could be one person who's a systems analyst, and that systems analyst is overseeing then the maintenance programmers and overseeing the database administrators in terms of the work that's being done. But as requests come in from users, more beyond, not necessarily the bug fixes, but more the enhancements. One will need to, I'm saying two different things. Bug fixes, we do need to record and track what those bug fixes are. So we do need some software to actually go and track that. Enhancements generally use the same software for that as well. And so sometimes when looking at a system, you talk about closed requests versus open requests. Sometimes the enhancements might be open for a long time. They may wait to the next major release of the software. But the bug fixes, if there's an immediate patch that's done, it could be fixed in a day or a week, depending on the process. And in terms of the approval process, I mean, there could be one of those automated things. If there's a bug fix, just go and do it on your own. Don't wait for improvement, depending on the nature of the bug fix. And then there would be for enhancements, well, there's a whole process to go through. The business has to sign off. The management has to sign off. So one of the things that is mentioned in the system regarding version control, and they talk about like major releases and minor releases. And I think you may have seen things like this when it comes to operating systems. Like if you think of iOS, iOS 11, iOS 12, iOS 13, there's the big number, and then 13.2.1, 13.2.2, the smaller numbers in terms of the versions. So that's something that's addressed in there as well. In terms of when a system is developed, benchmarks should have been created in terms of how the system is performing at that point. And whoever the system administrator is, they should be on a regular basis running reports to see how the system is performing based on what it should be. And so proactively, they should be taking a look at if the entry of data is starting to take a little bit longer, then maybe they need to address, well, why is it taking longer? Is there a problem? Is there a bottleneck in the system? Are we just dealing with more data? But we need those baselines to know whether something is really going slower or not. Sometimes it's users will say something's taking longer, and it's just that they're more impatient because in the beginning they had no idea how long something would take, and later has been using the system for a while. They want immediate response. So being able to document, this report took 20 seconds to run in the past, it's taking 22 seconds now, it's only 2 seconds more. Well, when do we become concerned? When it hits 25 seconds, when it hits 30 seconds, those are things that have to be figured out, and it depends on the system itself. So security. One thing I want to mention is that the companies may have specific policies regarding information in the way that it is labeled. And what I'm getting at is confidential and proprietary and restricted might be different levels of security assigned to the data. And if there is restricted access where only a handful, like maybe the executives or high-level staff should be able to see certain data, if that's what the company says, well, then the software is going to have to go along with it. So a lot of times it is the security policies the company has should drive the security that the system has. And so that's just something to be very mindful of. What those policies are. And it also can then go down to, depending on the level of information, a report has to be properly labeled depending on the kind of information it has. So if it is restricted information on a report, it better say it's restricted. And okay, so in terms of security, one of the things that is also addressed is risk management. How much risk are we willing to take based on the level of security that we're putting in? The book then gets into these different levels of security. So the physical security, and one thing it might be is the server in a locked room? That could be one thing in terms of the physical. Network security, making sure the default passwords aren't set for the router so that someone on the parking lot can go in. Application security, and some of it could be the roles that the people have. Maybe managers have higher level of security access than non-managers. File security, so the underlying place where the files are kept, preventing lurking eyes from seeing what's there. Procedural, the process that is gone through for certain operations. User level security, and I'm running out of, oh crap, this will be the end of part 1.